welcome to 2019. For our families, that happened a long time ago, but this is the first time we've been together so far this year. So thank you for a very, very impressive turnout tonight, our first Tech Tuesday of 2019. As you've seen, we have a pretty interesting topic for everybody tonight. We're all, I'm sure, in tune enough with the current events going on around the world in terms of trade agreements and countries like China and the United States and Canada. But against that backdrop, we have some pretty exciting information to share. Many of you may be already quite aware of it, but 14 years in the making and carrying on from there, of course. Pretty impressive trade agreement that for many of us, and I include ourselves, Wesley Clover in this case, there's some real positives to be taken from this. And I'm not going to tell the story. We have a whole host of very impressive people who will do that for us. So I'm going to introduce a moderator, and we're going to have a panel, and we'll go from there. There will be an opportunity for you all to ask questions of our very distinguished panel members. This will become obvious as we go through the evening. They're going to cover a range of subjects connected with what's known as CETA, the Canadian-European Trade Agreement. And I will stop there and introduce our moderator for the night. To my right here, Peter Mantis, and I do need to pull this out because I want to make sure I get your firm correct. He is he's one of the leading partners with a local firm who was instrumental in this whole initiative in terms of a support perspective. He's a partner at a leading Canadian firm called Fasken Martineau Dubelin Limited Liability Partners, LLP. So without further ado, let me introduce Peter for you, our moderator for this evening.
Well, everyone, thanks for coming out, and what a great showing as well. It's really an honor for me to be moderating this event because we've just got some great people coming out here tonight to speak to you. Let me just tell you a little bit about how this all came about. About a year ago, I was attending an event at the Greek ambassador's residence with members of the Hellenic Canadian Lawyers Association, which is a national group, and we started talking about CETA, and which you know is our trade agreement with Europe, and just talked about opportunities for business. And at one point, the ambassador said, well, why don't you guys organize a talk or do something to promote CETA? And that was really the genesis of tonight's event. And since then, we've just received tremendous support from the Greek ambassador and his embassy, and also the EU ambassador, who you're going to hear from tonight, and the EU delegation has just been instrumental in this. Global Affairs Canada, who's also here tonight, their reps. My own law firm has been also very supportive. And I just want to say thank you to Wesley Clover and Steve. We just really, truly appreciate the opportunity to do this, and it can't be done without you guys. When we first started talking about this event, it was about the opportunity for CETA, and I just want to talk a little bit about how that sort of evolved. Just take a few minutes before I introduce our guest tonight. It started to look more like a necessity than an opportunity. The buzzwords that we started using were things like necessity, diversification, risk, because for us here in this region, where we rely so much on international trade and business, some of our traditional trading relationships have entered into a more turbulent period of time. You guys are with me on that one, right? To the south, we have the President of the United States declaring a trade war on Canada and using language to describe our country that I think most of us have found shocking, called NAFTA the worst agreement in U.S. history. It could have been history of mankind, but I'm not sure, but you know what I'm talking about. And while we have a new trade agreement to replace NAFTA, the USMCA is not passed Congress. I'm sure many of you know that. And the Democrats are asking for change. And that means that free trade between the two countries remains uncertain. And I'm told in a few hours, or not told, but I've heard in a few hours that during the State of the Union address by the President, he's going to raise trade issues. And he's not always the most diplomatic person when he raises any issue. To the east, the UK, which is another very important trading partner of our country, is in a state of paralysis as that country is trying to grapple with its decision to exit the European Union. And we're seeing news of a steady stream of businesses moving from the UK to other parts of Europe in order to protect their business assets and their financial position. And then to the west, we see the arrest of a senior Huawei executive has plunged our country into just an astonishing conflict with China. Chinese state media writing things about Canada, which are just really unprecedented. Canadians being imprisoned, a jail sentence converted to a death sentence. Under these circumstances, the Canadians, people I've spoken to who do a lot of business in China are asking, what should we be doing in that country? Not only is it stable, but they're asking whether it's safe, which is just something that would have been unimaginable to discuss a few years ago. So now that I've bummed everybody out here and I've set up that dark and ominous backdrop, I'm going to switch and we're going to talk about something else. Tonight we're going to talk about the European Union. One of our other great trading partners, a huge relationship with Europe. And we're going to set all these other troubles aside, and we're going to gather here to spend some time and explore doing business in a part of the world where it's a different kind of an environment. I think it's a more welcoming environment at this point in time. I think you're going to find our speakers are going to be very welcoming. And here's what we've got lined up for you. We're going to start with a brief overview of CETA by arguably one of the most knowledgeable and senior people on the topic at Global Affairs Canada. He's going to speak, I'll introduce him in a few moments. He's going to speak for about 20 minutes just to introduce the topic and kind of give us all an overview of what CETA is all about. Then we're going to have a panel of 3 ambassadors from Europe. We have the EU ambassador, we have Spain, and we have Denmark. And we chose Spain and Denmark, EU obviously, but we chose Spain and Denmark for a reason. We wanted to give different perspectives on Europe. We chose a country which is a large country in the southern part of Europe and a somewhat smaller country in the northern part of Europe, and ones that perhaps are not the ones that spring to mind when we think about doing business in Europe, because I think it's important to remember that there are many countries in the European Union and there are a multitude of interesting opportunities that are presented by dealing with those countries. Now, Steve Verhall, who's on the program tonight, he's ill tonight, so he can't attend. It would have been great to have him here, but he sends his regrets, so he won't be on our panel. And we're going to leave lots of time for questions. This is really an opportunity for you to ask questions, difficult questions, and see if we can get a dialogue going. Just before I introduce our speakers, I do want to acknowledge that the Greek ambassador, His Excellency Dimitrios Azimopoulos, is here tonight. He's not sitting on our panel. He's actually, to show the commitment he's got to this type of thing. He has another commitment tonight, and he's come out in any event just to be with us. So I thank you very much, Your Excellency, for being here. And I was surprised to see also one of my good friends, Margaret Skok, who is actually our former ambassador to Kazakhstan, who's also come out tonight to attend our event. So thank you for coming out. And now let me just move right into the program. Our first speaker, who is going to introduce CETA and talk a little bit about what that's all about, is André Francois Giroux, and he's here to my right. He is the Secretary and Director of Trade Agreements and the NAFTA Secretariat at Global Affairs Canada, our Foreign Affairs Department. He's got, I was looking at his bio, I wasn't really sure, what to pull out of it, but I can tell you he's got a law degree. He's got 2 Masters of Law degrees and an MBA, so obviously understands business and, very, very well educated. He's been posted to the United Nations. He has been posted to France as a diplomat, and he himself was recently Canada's ambassador to Denmark. So very, very competent person to speak to us today on this topic. And I'm going to take a moment here to switch your PowerPoint on, but let's welcome André to the floor.
Well, thank you so much for those kind words. And then I'm sure the ambassadors here will agree with me, but any career diplomat who, an agreement like CETA is, you said, 14 years in the making, and anybody who's been around for more than 14 years or even 5 years has probably touched on the file at one point or another. And every time I come and I present on CETA, you sort of see your life going back. I was in Paris, as you said, and that was under a French presidency of the EU. And that was President Sarkozy at the time, who traveled to Quebec for the Canada-Europe-Quebec Summit, where we launched the negotiation of CETA in 2008, and that was the last file I worked on before I left Paris. And then, life being what it is, found myself in Denmark, such a lovely country, where I encountered with the ambassador there, as he was the legal advisor, and I had to go see him and see whether we could find a mutually agreeable resolution, which is a free trade agreement type of terminology, on some of our territorial disputes, and I'm sure you remember that very well. You may not know, but Canada has 2 territorial disputes with the Kingdom of Denmark. One is the Lincoln Sea border, or delimitation, and the other one is Hans Island. And then when I went to see the ambassador, then the legal advisor, he showed me this beautiful flag that you have on the wall there in your office, which is a Danish flag that is half torn apart because it used to fly on Hans Island, and Canadian and Danes have this tradition of stealing each other's flags. So the Danes put the flag on the island, leave a bottle of schnapps, and then the Canadian, a year or 2 later, land on the island, remove the Danish flag, puts the Canadian flag, take the bottle of schnapps, and leave the Canadian a bottle of Canadian whiskey. So a Canadian who stole the Danish flag gave it to him, and I believe it's still on the wall in your successor's offices. It's a beautiful. It almost looked like a piece of art. But it's a long story to say that although despite we have our territorial dispute, we do get along very well. European Union. So why would you want to do business in Europe? Well, it's because it's the world's second largest integrated economy, just after the U.S. It's also Canada's second largest trading partner. So 500 plus million consumers, a GDP of 22 trillion. You have some interesting numbers here. If you look at NAFTA as a part of the world economy, it's 27%. Then right after you have the EU 23% and 51% the rest of the world. So I don't think I need to say much more about this, but there's no doubt. And the other thing that you need to understand or grasp, and my purpose tonight is not to make any of you CETA experts, but it's just to give you enough of a sense of the wonderful opportunities that the agreement presents for people like you, for your businesses, for your partners, for all sorts of whether it's good or services or temporary entry. It's full of opportunities. Before CETA, 25% of EU tariff lines on Canadian goods were duty-free. So, 3/4 of the tariff lines, they were on various goods, there were 3/4 that had some tariff. After CETA, 98% duty-free. And then over a period of 7 years, we will get to 99%. I don't think we're going to get to 100% because we all, on both sides of the border, have special products. You must have heard about, what is it called in English? Is market management? No. Supply management. There you go. Thank you. So the famous quotas and things like that. So that's why you don't quite get to 100%. But even under CETA, there has been an agreement between the two parties to open those areas to a certain level of trade. So CETA is, for Canada and for the EU, the most comprehensive agreement we've ever negotiated. And in today's world, and in being in the field you are, you understand that it's much more, international trade is much more than selling widgets and buying something. It's about an integrated value chain. It's about providing selling a good and providing the aftercare service, or it's about just selling services. So CETA is obviously looking at goods, at services, at investment, but one of the beauty of the agreement is it's also, and it was very much designed with the view of an understanding that in Europe, like in Canada, most of the companies are small companies. So it's always easy for a big, large multinational to maneuver through the web of rules and find its way to the market. But for small companies, it's complex. So a lot of attention has gone into CETA to see how we can make it easier, facilitate, cut red tape. I'm not saying it's simple, because there's still lots. It's still a complex world, but a lot of attention has been put into it in trying to make the international trade experience as seamless as possible. So here you have a list of reasons why what CETA can do for you. It helps to generate growth and jobs in Canada, obviously. Create a level playing field in the EU for Canadian companies. So, Canadian companies, you have access in some areas that is equal to any other European company. Lower prices and widened choice for Canadian and European consumer. We often hear about free trade as being, I sell more, I buy less. President Trump has put a lot of emphasis on trade balances. But at the end of the day, it's about you or me as a customer who has a wide choice, better quality goods, and that works both ways as well. Cut custom duties obviously makes it easier on Canadian firms to sell services in Europe. For the first time, Europe has agreed to a negative list approach. Before we would do trade agreements, we would list the areas where those services that would be included in the free trade agreement. With CETA, we've taken the opposite approach. So by default, everything is covered, and unless you specifically exclude it. So if a new type of services were to emerge, then it's by default included under the agreement. Allows Canadian firms to bid to EU public contracts, and CETA again, and for Canada first as well, not just national level contracts, also subnational. So our provinces, territories, municipalities are, for the most part, covered under the agreement. This required a lot of diplomacy, internal diplomacy, to get our provinces on board and make sure that they were fully in line with what we were trying to do, and we're very proud about that. Protect Canadian investors and artists. Canada and the EU share a lot of common values, and you must have heard this, the right to regulate for the public, in the public interest or for legitimate purposes. So everywhere in CETA, we have this concept that governments have a duty, have the responsibility to regulate in the public interest, and whether it's in public health, public education, environmental protection, culture is one of those areas. So a very progressive agreement in that regard. Recognizes each other professional qualification. CETA provides the framework to get there, but we're not quite there yet. So, but basically, we are providing the framework for a corporate association, whether it's the Bar Association, for example, or the Canadian Architectural Order, to get together with European ones and then agreed on what would be the requirements so that a European architect could practice in Canada and vice versa, and same thing for lawyers. But that work has to be done by the professional orders, but CETA does provide the framework for that. Encourage European companies to invest more in Canada, of course. It's investments, it's trade, and protect people's right at work and the environment. We have embedded in the agreement strong chapters on labor norms and environmental norms, and that's something that is very important. just to give you a sense of how a free trade agreement works, and again, devils is in the details, and I believe you, if you ever have a hard time sleeping at night, hold the agreement and read the rules of origins chapter. Sleep in 5 minutes. I don't know what will, but it could be very technical, but it is, we're again here trying to have clear rules of origin, because of course a Canadian good has to have some Canadian content in order to be admitted to be free in Europe, and vice versa. It's about, we have very ambitious tariff elimination, access to public procurement I mentioned, and then labor mobility. This is an area I understand is of interest to you, so I'm happy to say a few words later about it. But again, fairly complex, but depending on your profession, the type of services you're providing, you would have free access to the EU market for a certain period of time, so you don't have to necessarily seek a work permit if you're doing aftercare on the service, if you fall in the right categories, if you're a professional of a specific qualifications, you may go and sell your services without necessarily having to worry about those market labor tests and so on and so forth. Streamlined custom trade facilitation, again, making it seamless as possible and easiest on exporters. 98% of Canadian products are now duty-free, including, sort of looking at the Ontario industrial base, industrial machinery, fabricated metal, chemicals and plastic, automotive products, but also improve access to Canadian services, supplier in sectors such as professional, environmental technology, information and communication technologies, architectural and engineering. So those are just examples. Yes, I think. Okay. So this slide basically is saying CETA has been in provisional application since September 2017. So we have a year and a few months of provisional application. Essentially, everything is enforced with very few exceptions when it comes to dispute settlement regarding investment and things like that. But we already see tangible results, and none of the numbers are showing up on the screen there, but basically when you look at the Canada-EU trading relations, we've already seen a 9.5% increase just in the first year. So we have a statistic that covers from October to September of last year, the first year of provisional application, 9.5% increase. Canadian exports to the EU increased by 4.4%, but if you exclude precious metal, which is a big part of it, then you see an increase of 12.7%. So that's pretty tangible. And Canadian imports from EU has also increased by 12.8. So 12.7 on one hand, 12.8 on the other hand. I would say that's a pretty balanced result. And we're quite happy with that. So it's been, because of course when you do a deal like this, if you want it to be successful and live through times, it has to be balanced, and I think already provisional applications show that this is the case. When it comes to ICT, I understand an area of interest to you. EU is the world's largest importer of telecommunications, computer and information services, and the fourth largest importer of information and communications technology products. So yeah, I think it's worth to spend a few minutes talking about it. So basically all EU tariffs on Canadian ICT products have been eliminated. Canadian ICT service providers are basically on an equal footing with their EU competitors. So what does it mean? Easier for short-term business visitors, intra-company transferring, investors, contract service suppliers, independent professionals to conduct business in many EU member states. And also, which is also very important, the extended access to government procurement, because sometimes these contracts work hand in hand with the government procurement. So Ontario ICT companies providing services related to technical testing and analysis, data processing, verification, software implementation can compete on an equal footing with EU service supplier. Temporary entry, I mentioned commitment there. In the area of e-commerce, CETA includes a permanent moratorium on customs duty, fees, and charges for digital product transmitted between Canada and the EU. And again, the link to government procurement. One thing that you always have to keep in mind, and we do a lot at Global Affairs Canada when we negotiate these free trade agreements, but they do not include everything. And one of the key concepts is that, you know, it's all about providing free and fair access. And then this is something that has come up many times. It's not about necessarily reducing norms, and it's not about a race to the bottom. So it's something that we hear sometimes. They're also based on the fact that each country keeps their own, and in CETA is a good example, you know, responsibilities for certification and labeling. So of course, we in CETA have provisions where we are developing the ability for a Canadian certifier to certify according to European norms. So basically, you don't have to travel to Europe to get your product certified. You can have it certified for Canada and Europe at the same time in Canada. So we're working on creating those agreements. But at the end of the day, your product still has to meet European standards. So it's a sensitive area in international trade. Some fear that, you know, trade agreements are forcing different standards or lower standards. That's definitely not the case. With CETA is we feel we have strong standards in Canada, same in Europe. We're not trying, you know, going forward, we may talk to each other, see how we can make sure that our standards are not exclusive to one another, but at the same time, we're very much respecting each other's requirements. Same thing for sanitary requirements, very important. VAT, the value-added tax. So you want to sell your products, you have to meet local certifications, you have to meet sanitary requirements if applicable, and you have to pay the local tax. And there's more information there if you're interested. www.international.gc.ca/CETA. There's lots of information. Here's just an example of what you will find on the page, but we have a brochure expand into the EU with the Trade Commissioner Service. That's the Global Affairs Canada service that helps exporters to sell their products abroad. Are you export ready? That's the first question the Trade Commissioner Service is going to ask you, or he may not ask you that so directly, but ask you a bunch of questions to see whether, you know, it's the right time for you. And if that's not the case, give you a few pointers of what you still need to consider or to do in order to be export ready. Exporting to the EU, a guide for a Canadian business. CETA is a big deal, yes, for Canadian companies. Your guide to government procurement in the EU, CETA promotion toolkit. So lots of information available online. One that I'll point out to is the tariff finder. It's like a web application. You go in there, you put your products, you find your tariff line, and then you get a sense of what's applicable. In most cases, if you're looking at Europe, it's going to be 0, but it's always nice to know that that's the case. Partners in exporting, Trade Commissioner Service, Service des délégués commerciaux. The Canadian Commercial Corporation is also something if you're looking into selling to governments, it's a useful tool for you. EDC, Export Development Canada, and the Banque de Développement du Canada, or the Business Development Bank of Canada, are also federal entities that can help you with your project. Well, I have a captive audience, and I thought we'll just take a few minutes to also let you know that we just launched public consultations on the future WTO negotiations on e-commerce. So the WTO, the World Trade Organization, is in a process of and that would take years, of trying to develop some basic guidelines or discipline for e-commerce, and the Canadian government, we are very much interested in your views. So if you do have views, I would encourage you to follow the link or just write to us. Basically, there's lots of information on the website, and I'm happy to follow up with you if I understand it's not necessarily the easiest to note down this one. But basically, the consultations are open until the 25th of April. We would very welcome your views. It helps us. We take our mandate very seriously. Our role is to negotiate these agreements, these discipline, whether it's multilateral, bilaterally, but our guide is your wishes. So there's no point for us to do all of this if we don't have your support and your input, and we want to make sure that when we argue or insist on something, that's actually what you want. I guess I'll stop here.
Thank you very much.
Voilà.
That's fabulous. Thank you.
Oh, just one last thing before I forget. I've put many of these on the table just across from the door, and there's also a few, not as many, but a few of these. Includes a pen, a notepad, and some interesting information. So please help yourself at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
That's great. I'm going to ask our ambassadors now to take a seat. If you can come up, and I'm going to introduce them. And as Andre was saying, just as they're taking their seats, there's other people here. There's people from the Global Affairs Canada who can answer questions afterwards if you want to speak to them. And because people are probably wondering if you're not doing business in Europe already, if you have no experience, you probably have some questions, of all sorts. How do I do it? It may sound like a big step. And we also have here, just sitting in front, we have Delphine Szilard, who is the head of the Trade and Economic section at the EU delegation too, who I'm sure would be able to answer some questions. I'm putting you on the spot, but anyhow, just to let you know, there's lots of people who've come out here for this event who can answer some other questions afterwards. Let me introduce our panel. On my immediate left here is His Excellency Pēteris Ustūps, who is our ambassador, or the EU ambassador to Canada. He's from Latvia and joined the Foreign Service in 1993, held numerous senior portfolios in the Foreign Service there, including Foreign Policy Advisor to the Prime Minister, and has also had a very important career with the EU. He's had numerous senior portfolios there, including Senior Advisor for the Americas, and it's a real honor to have him with us here tonight. To his left is His Excellency Enrique Ruiz Molero, who is the Spanish ambassador to Canada. And he's been a diplomat since 1979 and has had many senior portfolios. I'm not going to list them all, we'd be here all night, with the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He's been posted in, I was reading the list, Panama, The Hague, Mauritania, Mali, Brazil, France, the United States, and he's now here with us here and has extensive experience in economic and trade matters as well. And then to his left is His Excellency Thomas Winkler, who joined the Foreign Service in 1988. He's been very storied career. I was looking at it and felt quite unworthy. But he has been posted in Moscow, Kiev, Stockholm. In fact, before coming to Canada, he was Denmark's ambassador to Russia. And of course, now he's the ambassador for Denmark to Canada. So with that, thank you, gentlemen, for being here. The way we are going to do this tonight is going to ask each of you to say a few words by way of introduction, and then we're turning it over to you guys here to ask questions. Hopefully you've got some great ones coming up.
Thank you very much, and I would like to start by thanking organizers for doing this event, and as at the outset it was said that Happy New Year. Actually, it's the best day to say that, because tonight is actually Chinese New Year, so therefore, Happy New Year to everyone. And it's not only Chinese, it's also Vietnamese and it's also Korean, so we can choose different New Years for tonight. Actually, it is very encouraging to see so many of you out here, and I would be rather discouraged to come to Canada, which is famous of being the IT sector, and to see the auditorium empty. So then I would say, yes, there is something wrong with EU-Canada trade relations. So therefore, your presence tonight is rather encouraging for me, because I see that two like-minded partners, being the EU and Canada, with so similar business mentality, definitely under the umbrella of CETA, as presented by André, provides a lot of opportunities. And I don't want to repeat all the goodies what André already presented to the enterprises who are interested in doing business in Europe, or together with Europe, or in Canada together with Europe, and they are a lot. I would like to mention a few things. First of all, the things you are doing in Canada, either this is development of artificial intelligence, either this is automotive sector, either this is 5G and many other things. Those are very topical events and many topical issues, and we have a lot of interest in those products. And as already mentioned, Europe is one of the largest importers of ITC sector. So we have an interest in what you do in Canada. Secondly, if we look at some of the interests specifically in procurement sector coming from CETA agreement, I want to mention, let's say, or repeat two things from André's presentation. First of all in all, 250,000 public entities in Europe on daily basis are publishing the procurement offers on daily basis. And all in all, the European Union is spending approximately 14% of our GDP, which was on the screen mentioned 22 trillion, every year on the procurement. So therefore, companies like yours, being in IT and similar sectors, definitely should look at this opportunity, what procurement, being in CETA, really offers to you. Secondly, or thirdly, usually service sector is somehow seen as being untangible, and what exactly that is going to bring to economy and what I'm going to export. And very often services sector is going together with placement of the workers. And there, actually, again, as André already mentioned, there is a lot of possibilities opening up for movement of the staff of your companies between EU and Canada, and CETA is really basis for that, which have to be used if you are interested in advancing your products and advancing your interests. And I think now we reached the stage where we can talk about the success of CETA. There was a lot of question marks saying, yes, but CETA is in place since 1 year. Is there really some kind of good statistics? And the figure of roughly 13% of growth, a little bit more than a year, I think is very encouraging signal for both sides, for EU and Canada, suggesting that actually there is a substance in the agreement which should be used and which should be promoted. So I don't want to prolong my monologue, because there are other gentlemen who would like to say a few words. And last point for me is, I'm inviting you to discover EU. Why I'm saying that? Actually, my colleagues, Spanish and Danish ambassadors tonight here is evidence of that, that please discover 28 EU member states. 28 EU member states in a single market, with a single set of rules, and actually even more, saying in a digital single market. So there is not only CETA you have to discover, but also the opportunities in a one single united market of 28 EU member states. And once again, thank you very much for tonight, and thank you very much for possibility to talk. And I'm looking forward to easy questions tonight.
Thank you, Peter, for giving me this opportunity. Thank you, Petris, also for the invitation. I will take advantage of the minutes allocated to make a small presentation about Spain. Spain is a country most of you will probably know for touristic reasons, but probably the ICT market, it is probably not so well known. And we are, after the big four, Germany, the UK, France, and Italy, we are the next country in size in Europe. We are a 47 million market. So it is quite important. There are over 34,000 companies, ICT companies in Spain. The whole sector employs almost 500,000 people. And the value, the added value of this sector in the Spanish GDP is more than 4%. This is very, very important, and the foreign investment in this sector only last year was more than 2 billion euro. The exports of these products went up to 14 billion from Spain to the rest of the world. It's a market where we import, like any other European country, a lot of products, but we also export because so many companies are installed in Spain, and from there, from their bases in Spain, they export to other countries, to other markets that are within the European Union and outside the European Union. To give you an idea of this market, there are more than 52 million mobile phones in Spain. 52 million mobile phones. 34 million internet users. 86% of the households are equipped with computers. So almost everybody, 93% of the people, have mobile phones, and there are 15 million gamers also. So not to tire you too much with these numbers, another interesting thing that is not so well known is that Spanish is the third language in the internet community. So the first one is English, over 1 billion people using it. The second is Chinese, 800 million. But the third is Spanish in the web. So this also very important. Another issue that was raised was e-commerce. E-commerce was small in Spain only 10 years ago, but today it has reached 31 billion euro in e-commerce. So that's also very important market. What else is different or characteristic about our market? It's the labor costs. Spain is a country that is competitive because labor costs are relatively small. I said we were the 5th country in size in Europe, yet when you are talking about labor costs, we are around the 14th. So there are like 13 countries in Europe where it's more expensive to hire people, where you have to pay more to your managers, to your engineers, to the people working in your companies. This is why so many companies have invested in Spain, attracted by this cheaper labor market. This is very important. I have the details here later if someone is interested. And finally, well, I can't show it, and you will recognize many of these little companies, little signs, but everybody in the sector, software vendors, hardware vendors, telecom equipment, service providers, practically all companies are present in Spain, all the big ones. But in such a big market, there is space for more. We are ready for more business in Spain, and the government has created an institution called Invest in Spain, that is to help foreign investors in their first steps in the Spanish market. And I also want to conclude saying that the Embassy of Spain in Canada has 2 commercial officers, with their offices, trade commissioners, one in Ottawa, one in Toronto. You can see their web pages and with plenty of information. The name is ICEX because it's ICEX. It means International Commerce of Spain. And I encourage you to visit these pages to get more information about Spain. Thank you.
Yeah, ambassadors in high tech. So good evening, and I can't sit and talk. So if it's okay, I will move a bit around. Good evening, and thank you for this opportunity to speak to this interesting group about Denmark, or perhaps about the EU, Canada, and CETA. I'm not a CETA expert, so don't worry. I'm not going to talk a lot about details in CETA. Of course, the evening started with a shock when Peter said that, you know, Spain and Denmark are perhaps not the countries that spring to mind when you think about the EU. It's like, what? But now at least you've all heard about Hans Island, or as we call it, the way civilized nations wage war. So you will not forget it. You will also... Many of you will also be familiar with Danish companies like Lego, I'm sure most of you have heard about, or Maersk, who's actually one of the very happy Danish companies in Canada because they are seeing a tremendous increase in the transport into the harbor of Montreal. And they are really sort of saying CETA is working. I'm not sure we can prove it. I will leave that to my colleague from the EU. But you know, as diplomats, we say, well, Maersk is happy, and if Maersk is happy, Denmark is happy, right? So, as you heard, I'm the ambassador of the Kingdom of Denmark to Canada. And I have to say, when you've been here, I've only been here for 5 months, and you keep hearing about Canada's problem with her neighbor. And this is a big neighbor to the south. You also have a couple of other neighbors, including one to the north, which is the Kingdom of Denmark, which is Greenland. We have, as Peter also alluded to in the beginning, we have common values. We are very much alike. You don't have to be in Canada long as a Dane to see that we are thinking in very much the same ways. We have the same business culture. We have the same way of working together and with each other. So we are natural, strong partners. Of course, tonight, I will say a bit about Invest in Denmark as well, but tonight I'm also here as an example of an EU member state that where things are working and where the EU benefits that Peter was talking about are actually implemented in real life. Denmark is a member of the EU. We've been that since '73. We're in the EU because we can make money, right? Danes we are merchants, right? There was a time when we used to sail around and hit people on the head, and we found out that was not a good way of doing it. Right? It's much better to come back again and again and you know, make them buy our products. So we are merchants, and this is also why we are in the EU. And I can't help but notice, because Brexit, it is really a tragedy for the Brits. It's really a challenge for the EU. But as an EU enthusiast, I can't help but notice that the EU has never been as popular in Denmark as it is right now. It's even more popular than when we voted back in '72. And this is because of the, let's say, the scare of Brexit and the Danes looking at what's going on in the UK. We are a stronger and stronger supporter of the EU. I think it's also important when you look out at the EU to see that there are also the regions. We have Spain as part of the Mediterranean region. We have Denmark as part of both Scandinavia with our Norwegian and Swedish friends, the Nordic countries when we add Iceland and Finland, but also a region like, let's call it Northern Europe, with the north of northern Germany, and of course the UK. So many of the countries in the EU are not only good in their own rights, but also because they are access points to regions of the European Union. Denmark is a small open economy. For that reason, obviously, we are a strong supporter of free trade, and CETA, in our mind, is one of the best current examples of a free trade agreement which benefits everybody. So you and the Danish companies, because it's not only the Canadians, you have to use the benefits that CETA will give you. Then you come to this point and say, what does this ambassador know about the IT and tech sector? Basically, very, very little. I use it. I note when it doesn't work, but apart from that, I'm not a bit expert. I just have to note that apart from what we've seen already, I think the whole issue of digitalization is key in making CETA and other agreements work. Our systems across the Atlantic have to speak better to one another. I'm not going to judge about the digitalization status in Canada. I'm just going to note that when I opened a Canadian bank account 5 months ago, the banking advisor said, "How many checks do you want?" And I was like, "Sorry? You mean mobile pay? No checks, you know, these physical little laps of papers that I last used in Denmark like 25, 30 years ago, and which are really not available anymore." So I'm not going to judge it, but I'm just saying, I think there is a need to work further on the digitalization across the Atlantic. And this is one of my roles. I basically have two roles, or let's say as a government representative. One of my roles is to make sure that rules, regulations, and systems, including for the IT and tech sector, that they are the best possible. And this goes in two ways. It goes multilateral. Multinational is the word. That's why Denmark has appointed a tech ambassador, whose role is to link up with the big tech companies and communities to make sure that when we do rules and regulations, it's something that will actually also fit the sector. Of course, unless you misbehave in a big way, then the rules and regulation will be slightly different. The Danish tech ambassador was in Ottawa again last week. There's a very, very strong Danish-Canadian cooperation in ensuring and working for the best possible rules and regulation for the IT and tech sector. Of course, it also goes government to government, and we have a very strong bilateral cooperation with Canada on exactly digitalization, and how can we help one another to make our systems speak better. And then to end on my second role, which is of course to promote Danish companies in Canada and get you to invest in Denmark. I have sort of, apart from a different country, it's basically the same approach, right? If you need a partner in Denmark, you come to the Danish embassy in Ottawa, and we'll find you a partner. You can Google us, we are quite easy to find. The same, if you feel like investing in Denmark might be an option, go to Invest in Denmark. We do believe we are a very, let's say, high scorer on many. I mean, we're very happy people and all this, but we are also scoring very high on a worldwide scale as an investment country. We have a very good infrastructure, we have cheap energy, we have a very, very strong educational system, and we are an innovative people. That's why Lego is Danish. I mean, we only have our brains. We have nothing else, or some bacon and stuff, but that's not it. But we basically we only have our brains. So I think exactly for the IT and tech sector, Denmark is a very good country to invest in. And if you don't believe me, ask your partners in the medical cannabis business, because they are, I know, I always find it difficult not to laugh when I say it, But this is really serious business, right? This is a lot of money, and they are investing right now massively in Denmark because they have found out the combination, of course, for their purposes of cheap energy and a strong infrastructure, and the innovative approach that we have when you're going to make the best possible medical cannabis plants. So don't take my word for it. Of course, you have to believe everything Ambassador said, right, colleagues? But if you're in doubt, ask your colleagues in the Canadian medical cannabis business. Thank you very much.